For our next session, we'll have a moderated question and answer session. Lieutenant Colonel Phil Botwinick will lead the session. Major General Carden.
Good morning, everyone. It's my honor today to introduce Senator David Perdue. He could have been anywhere this morning, has a lot of obligations. His schedule is obviously tight, but he made a conscious decision to be here with us. In many ways, Senator Perdue is the original political outsider. He grew up in Middle Georgia. He worked his way through college studying engineering at Georgia Tech, and then he spent 4 decades in business before joining the United States Senate. As a Fortune 500 CEO, Senator Perdue was often the underdog, leading Reebok, athletic brands, and General Dollar stores where he competed with brands like Nike and Walmart. During this time in business, he learned how to listen to his customers in order to turn around these major American companies. In the Senate, he sits on the powerful Armed Services Committee, the Banking, Budget, and Agricultural Committees, where he's now working to help change the direction of our country. In a relatively short period of time, Senator Perdue has demonstrated that he has a proven record of getting results for Georgia. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce to you our Senator David Perdue. Sir, thank you for being here.
So it's quite an honor. Please be seated to have Senator Perdue with us. We have some submitted questions for Senator Perdue to answer. The first one is, how would you describe Georgia's role, and specifically the Georgia National Guard's role, in our national defense?
Well, when you have 336,000 troops in uniform in the Guard and 107 in the Air National Guard, it is the backbone, really, of the flexibility that we have, the ability we have to flex our military might around the world. You see it in Afghanistan right now. 48's over there. You saw it right here in Georgia when we have a natural catastrophe. National security means a lot of things, and flexibility means a lot of things. We're technically a peaceful country, but right now we are, because of the state of the world, we're the backbone of the global security system that we know today. And a large part of that is what we have in Guard and Reserve. My dad was in World War II. He was in Korea. Later he was in the reserves in a military town called Warner Robins right here in Georgia. And I've learned how important that flexibility is, and the ability and the training that we have in people in the Guard is the backbone. I was just talking to the general outside. He came from Americus, Georgia, came from a peanut farm, and I can tell you the backbone of what we have in our national security system rests right here in the National Guard and in the Reserve. Let's don't minimize what they do as well. So I'm just so grateful to be here today, and thank you all for what you do for America.
Yes, sir. And as you know, the 48th Brigade is currently deployed to Afghanistan, supporting Operation Freedom Sentinel. What are your thoughts on U.S. involvement in Afghanistan?
Let's start off with the easy ones first. Okay. Let me give you a little background. I grew up here in Middle Georgia, and I've lived all over the world. I had an office in Hong Kong, lived in Hong Kong for a while, but I also had an office in Lahore. So I've been to Khyber Pass. I've been in Afghanistan for years, decades really. I was just back over there with General Nicholson. I've just been there with General Miller. We now have a plan. But let's remember why we're there, guys. 3,000 people in the United States are dead because of some guys who had a home base right there in Afghanistan. This isn't a political war. This is our own national security, and we have to remind our young people today why we're there in the first place. That's number one. Number two is that we don't want it to reconstitute itself, and it's reconstituting itself right now. Al-Qaeda is in a different form. You have ISIS now there, and this is still a powerful base. Taliban is still very powerful, and our mission right now is to get Taliban to the table. And if they don't come to the table for the right reason, we don't want them at the table. And that's what this is all about right now. I mean, I can tell you the best, and I mean the very best, of what America puts out right now is in uniform around the world, but especially in these hot spots like Bagram and places like that in Afghanistan. I asked this one staff sergeant, how many times have you been over here? You know, we have these meetings just like this when we get over there, and I had this staff sergeant. I said, so how many deployments have you been to? Sir, I've been here 6 times. I said, you got a family? He said, yes, sir. I got 2 kids and a wife back home. Fort Stewart. He said, how do you do that? I said, sir, this is my job. This is my career. This is what I signed up to do. I need to be here. I mean, you can't tell people how important that is. The future of Afghanistan is important. Our future role there is uncertain. We want to get a peace treaty there with the Taliban. But I can tell you this, the thing's not going to be solved until we solve the Pashtun problem, the Haqqani network, and all the things going on in Pakistan between their intelligence community and what you see China doing right now in that big road investment they've made down into Pakistan. China is very involved in that area. But let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. That's Iran. There's a reason why we're in Afghanistan, in addition to the reason we went there in the first place. This is a very dangerous world. We have 5 threats across 5 domains. You've got, and I would put it this way in priority, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and terrorism. That's just a country boy's way of saying that's the way I see it. Across 5 domains. It used to be air, land, and sea. Well, no longer. We now have cyber, and we've got space we've got to worry about. And we don't have the lead in some of these domains that we've enjoyed for the last 70 years in air, land, and sea, thanks to you guys. But we're catching up fast, and we're going to make darn sure we maintain that same lead in those domains, too.
Yes, sir. Also, this is...
Oh, for me? Okay, thank you. Do I have a scratchy voice? Is that what you're
No,
telling me?
this Senator's nonstop travel, so we promise to provide water. So now the Air National Guard is an important focus for us and is an integral part of the 116th Air Control Wing and JSTARS operation at Robbins Air Force Base. I know you've been involved in many conversations about the future of JSTARS. What can you tell us about it?
Well, first of all, it's been the backbone of our ISR around the world. You talk to any combatant commander today, and the first thing they're going to tell you is, I'm going to get 15% of what I need out of ISR and JSTARS. I grew up in Robbins Air Force Base. Robbins Air Force Base, like most bases around the country, it has morphed over time. When I was growing up, it was a military air command. It was a strategic air command. I remember the '62 crisis, the Cuban crisis, and about every 5 minutes, a B-52 or a KC-135 or a C-141 or a C-130 was taken up. Yeah, I know, we've been flying C-130s for 70 years, but they were going off, and I mean, I thought the world was coming to an end. JSTARS has been the backbone, but let's face the reality of what we're looking at right now. We're looking at a future that is totally different than the battle we've been fighting before. And the worst thing we can do in Congress and the worst thing we can do in the U.S. military is prepare for the last war. You guys don't do that. You're training for the next war. I look at all this technology out front here in these vendors, and I want to thank these vendors, by the way, that are here. Guys, let's give them a round of applause. Seriously, I think that's fantastic. The thing about JSTARS is that it provides a backbone for the next generation. The next generation is advanced battle management system. We're going to integrate sensors across all services. It's very complicated. Most of it is classified right now. But I can tell you that you'd be really proud of what the secretaries and the leaders and the generals are doing right now in terms of developing the next level of ISR capability around the world. There's a gap, though, and I'll be quite candid with you. We've waited way too long. We're flying planes that were burnt out when we bought them in the first place. We have about 16 of them now in that air. It's a it's a Boeing 707. It was Air India, Pakistani Air. I mean, hell, guys, I may have flown on one of those planes, years ago when they were in commercial service. But we burned them up. More importantly, there are 3 major areas in the world where A2AD is a very real reality, and those planes can't get in there. And so they were developed for the tank war in Eastern Europe, over the horizon ISR, and that's what they're capable of doing. They're the best we got, the best the world has. They're the best at drug interdiction. They're the best at a lot of things, and as long as A2AD is not an issue. But in 3 areas right now in the world, that is an issue. I can tell you Kaliningrad, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, right now you've got to have something that can get through an A2AD environment. And so that's what they're developing right now. But there's a gap. And what we're concerned about is that we just funded in the authorization that we just funded the military, and I want to talk about that in a second. Can I do that? Yes, sir. Because this is important for you to know. But we funded this to close that gap. So we're extending the life of JSTARS. They tell us they can do it. It's expensive, but we need to do that, and that means jobs. It means that we're going to have that capability for the combatant commanders. But we're also accelerating. We put money in there to accelerate the ABMS technology and the integration that we can do this without waiting until everything's ready. We can start implementing phases of it that are ready almost now. So I'm very optimistic that that's going to provide the backbone to close this gap, to create that future capability for you. And believe me, when you see what's coming, you will be satisfied and very pleased with that level of ISR. The information will be so much more readily available to you. It'll be real time, be more flexible, and there are a lot of components to it that I can't talk about today. Let me say this. The other thing that we're doing in this authorization is very real for you. First of all, let me back up. In 2017, the readiness in the United States military was not what we want. It wasn't your fault, it was Congress's fault. Over about a decade, the spending of our U.S. military was cut about 25%. Since I've been there, I'm on budget and I'm on armed services. I got both hats. And I can see the reality of what we have. General Mattis says the greatest threat to national security is our own debt, and he's right. I've been saying that since I got in this business. And I can tell you we're dealing with that right now. Growing the economy the way it's growing right now has lowered the debt curve by $3 trillion over the next decade. That's very real. In the last 2 years alone, we've added $160 billion to our spending in the military because we've got to get readiness back. And I can tell you we went from 3 Army brigades ready to fight that tonight to over 29 now in just 2 years. We had 2/3 of our FA-18s couldn't fly. Couldn't fly. These are our lead strike fighters. Today, we hit 80% last month in readiness. That's remarkable achievement in 2 years. But more importantly than even that was for the last 2 years, we haven't had a continuing resolution. Now, most of you don't have to worry about a continuing resolution. I can tell you it's the most insidious thing that hits the military that I know of. It basically shuts us down in terms of moving money. I see heads nodding out here. I'm a business guy. Somebody told me that you're only going to spend next year, and I've done this before, you're only going to spend next year what you spent last year. That's not a big a deal. But when they say you can't move money from department to department, from line item to line item, you have to stop training, you have to stop programs in the middle of the process, give me a break. I can tell you right now, I can document to you our procurement costs go up 15% because of the CRs. Now, we've just described how bad that is. Guess how many CRs, continuing resolutions, that Congress has done since 1974 when the Budget Act 74 was put in place. We've done 187. 187, guys. We're buying aircraft carriers. We don't have a capital budget. We don't have a balance sheet. We're changing all that. We now, for the first time under President Trump, we have a DOD audit. Why is that important? Because we can find areas where money is being wasted because of bureaucracy, not military bureaucracy, but civil bureaucracy, and move it to the point where it can actually add value. How about building a bunch of new C-130Js instead of trying to retrofit all the H's we got, you know? I understand the MP2000 propeller is necessary. We got to get that out there. But the other thing we did, and I want to highlight a couple of these things right now, Colonel, if I could do that. We've got this year, this is a watershed year. We just passed an authorization. Now, it's got to go through appropriation, but I think we'll get there, and we'll get there before September. We're trying our best to not have another CR this year. But this is what is included in there. We've got a 3% pay increase. It's the largest since 2010. We've actually confirmed the President's end strength at 336 and 107 in the Guard, and I think that's absolutely critical. There are a lot of people who took shots at that in the first round of this thing, but we were able to maintain that. We funded ABMS and JSTARS in a way that actually can accelerate the development of ABMS, like I just said, and extend the life of JSTARS. You got the Apache and the Black Hawk maintenance coming. You got the C-130 we just talked about, the MP2000 propeller, and we're trying our best to get a few more. I think there are 12 in there of J's that we're trying to get a few more added to that so we can get our readiness back to where we want. But I want you guys to know that the Congress is becoming more aware of what they've done in the past that they didn't realize had such a big impact. I had this conversation with President Trump just last week about this conversation about the budget caps. I don't want to get into all that today, but I can just tell you he is very sensitive. The reason we're going to get past that is because what we have to do in our military. We've made too much progress in 2 years to give any of it back. And the rest of the world's watching. We can talk about China in a minute, Colonel, if you want to, but the rest of the world is watching what we do around this funding issue right now for you guys. So just know a few of us up there are trying to have your backs right now. Thank you.
Okay, yes, sir. Now, many guardsmen help distribute food and hand out supplies and assist cleanup efforts after Hurricane Michael hit southwest Georgia last October. Can you give us an update on the disaster aid and the status of money flowing to those communities?
Yeah, guys, I'm really 35. I just look 60 because I've been working so hard on this thing in the last few months. This is ridiculous. Let me just do a shout out, though. Y'all, I'm telling you, the first thing that I noticed when I was down there, besides the devastation, was how many Guard troops are down there. I mean, my God, at the time I didn't know. But in Bainbridge and all those places west of there, I mean, there were over 900 from 38 units down there. Y'all, it made a difference, and those people don't forget that. I was just recently down there. Let me give you an update. This is 8 months. This is how ridiculous this is. This is nothing but pure partisan politics. This is 8 months we've been waiting to get this thing done. 8 months. Katrina, $56 billion, only took 2 months. That was the longest disaster relief payment in our history since, well, at least the last 70 years. 2 months. This has been 8 months. Katrina, as bad as it was, money started flowing in 2 weeks. I mean, this is historic how bad this has been. So what we've done now is we've got a negotiation. We finally got it done. But let me tell you what happened last Thursday. Last Thursday, President Trump agreed to separate the border security. This is not the border wall or anything else or any military. This is about the humanitarian aid that he wants to handle this the increase in influx of illegal traffic coming across the border. So he wanted that as part of this disaster relief package. But before that, we were held up on Puerto Rico, and it was, you satisfy that, it was something else. It was just one thing after another for 8 months. Well, we finally got a breakthrough, got everybody to agree on what the numbers had to be, and realized that we had already sent $40 billion to Puerto Rico over the 16 and 17 disasters, and another $52 billion going in terms of community development block grants over the next 5 years. So there was a lot of money already going, but the president still stepped in and did more in order to get this freed up. But last week we freed it up, passed the bill. This happened within 2 hours. So this is about 1 o'clock. We got him to say, yes, we're going to do that. Within 2 hours, we voted on the floor of the Senate. This is how insane this is, guys. We passed that bill on the Senate floor 85-8. 85-8. I mean, it's unnecessary, but we've got it flowing now. We have the House is coming back on Monday. They're going to pass it, we're sure. So this money will start flowing. But I don't want to thank you guys for your part in helping those poor folks down there get back on their feet. The general's from that area. I can tell you, I've got relatives down there. It's the most devastating thing I've seen in that ag community in a long time. But it was more than that. I mean, $8.5 billion goes to California for fires. If you've seen those fires and the devastation out there, you'll see that's pretty big too. So anyway, thanks for your role in that.
Yes, sir. So as far as the national defense, hope everyone can hear me. In terms of refocusing our efforts from counterterrorism to great power competition, how important are military-to-military engagements through programs like the State Partnership Program in winning the future fight against Russia and China?
You know, guys, the number one challenge we have right now in America, I believe, is to make sure we don't get in an arms race with China. I think the number one problem in China is that they need to make sure they don't get in an arms race with us. We're the 800-pound gorilla because of you, and they know that. I lived over there. I was just at the Shangri-La Military Conference in Singapore. General Mattis, when he was then Secretary Mattis before he resigned, was asked a question by the head of the PLA. The head of the number one guy in the PLA was in the audience. He stood up and asked a question, talked about South China Sea, and he berated the United States over why we were challenging their authority in the South China Sea. Secretary Mattis just stood there and nodded his head, and finally he got through, and Secretary Mattis answered a question in about 7 minutes, gave a historical lesson, a history lesson about the history of those and the ownership legacy of those islands. It was really something to see. PLA guy didn't stand up and challenge at all. After that meeting, I was in another meeting where we were talking, and there's a lot of cooperation between them, but there's open challenging right now, a challenge, because they really see themselves as a hegemon. Let me give you the quotes. President Xi Jinping last year made a quote. He said, just as there can't be two suns in the sky, there can't be two emperors on the earth. And the telling thing there is that the word he used for emperor, you know, in Mandarin, if you have a word, it can have 4 different meanings depending on the tone. So ba is the word he used for emperor. Ba means emperor. That means a benign head of state, a benign person that takes care of their people and that sort of thing. Ba means hegemon. That means the rule maker. And for 4,000 years, they saw themselves as the world's rule maker, and they see that's their rightful place. If you read Michael Pillsbury's 100-Year Marathon, or Kissinger's new book on China, or Hank Paulson's book on China, you'll see that these are 3 China experts warning us about what's going on, but we don't have to read that. Made in China 2025, if you don't know what that is, it's basically China is now telling the world what they're doing in technology. Well, that's really disturbing, because if you know what they do in the warring states from 400 BC to 400 AD, is the Confucius time in Sun Tzu. And you guys are all experts about General Sun Tzu, but I can tell you this. Sun Tzu had a principle. You don't tell your opponent what you're doing until you've made a decision that you can determine that they either have made the decision that they don't have the wherewithal or the will to stand up to you. And that's what China had made. China had made that determination about 10 years ago to do that. Now they're backing up on that. The Belt Road Initiative is another part of that. The number one challenge we have in the world right now is to make sure we help China become a partner in the modern world. They've got 300 million middle-class consumers. We have 150. They've got almost 1 billion people, though, that are still peasants. They're living in the 19th century. They've got a huge problem. We can help them with that. We've already helped them develop in the last 30 years. But what we don't want to do is get into a mano arms race with them in the next 50 years. The world doesn't need that. The world needs us to have a strong support for our allies, a strong military protection for all of us. But here's the way I see the world right now. There are a few states that believe in state control. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, right? Well, if you add up the GDP power of all of those 4 states, you get about $16 trillion. Now, the rest of the world believes in self-determination in one form or another. We have a representative democracy. France might have a social democracy. But if you add the GDP production power of our ally structure, you get over $65 trillion. Which side do you want to be on in that one? So I think China realizes that too. I think China's looking at this too simply. But our thing right now is to make sure we get our military back on its feet in readiness, that we do the recap that we need, and we make sure that this voluntary force gets treated the way it should be treated, because this is the problem. A voluntary force is the best type of military in the world. It's expensive. We spend almost $1 trillion today between active duty and VA and retirement for our total military situation. Out of $4 trillion, we spend $1 trillion on global security. The second thing I'll say, and we'll close with this on this question, is NATO. NATO has been spending about 1% of their GDP on the military. We spend about 3%. If you take that 2% difference on the same size economies, about $20 trillion, you can do the math, that's $400 billion a year minimal that they should have been spending in the last 50 years that they haven't been spending on their military. We've been filling that gap. And that day is coming to an end. They have agreed to double that now, and that'll make a big difference on how much we have to spend and how much better we can support this recap that we have to do in the military.
Yes, Senator. So there's been a lot of talk about creating another branch of the armed forces to manage space operations. What are your thoughts on developing a space force?
Well, I think here's the problem. In the last 50 years, we've used space as a scientific endeavor. Unfortunately, in the last 30 years, Russia and China have used space as a military endeavor. That's a huge difference. And so we saw it. We had a Sputnik moment in 2009 when China shot down one of their own weather satellites from the ground. And now they've got robotic development. This is not a high-cost ability that they've developed in order to screw with our GPS, get into our weather satellites. I mean, a lot of the technology that we depend on in terms of, and this whole ABMS thing I'm talking about, that has to be hardened. It has to be secure. And so you have to deal with that in space, because that's a lot of, the space communication is a big part of that networking from all the sensors around the world. So I believe in a Space Force. I've supported it since day one. But here's what, and we just did this in the NDA. We had a big fight in our authorization process just 2 weeks ago, and that is that the Space Force should be treated just like the Marines, in my view. It's a direct analogy. You've got the Navy, and you got the Marines, and you got the Secretary of the Navy. Just, that's the way it works. So you have the Chief of Naval Operations, you have the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and you have the Secretary of the Navy. That's easy. It's worked for 200 years. Well, over here, you got the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I believe you got Chief of Staff of Space Command, Space Force, and you got the Secretary of the Air Force. And that's what we just approved in Congress. That's what the military wanted, that's what the President wants, and that's the direction I see us going in right now unless we have a debate. So that accelerates this. Now you got Space Command down here too. So you've got the same sort of matrix we have in our combatant commanders and our service commanders at the top, and I think it will accelerate. Now what we got to be sure we don't do is build up a duplicate bureaucracy in procurement or in operations, and I don't see us doing that.
Thank you, Senator. Another previously submitted question you've touched on already, but as a follow-up, across the board, continuing resolutions are damaging to our operations and limit our ability to plan for the future. How specifically is Congress working to prevent a continuing resolution this year?
Thank you. The last 2 years, like I said, we had 187 since 1974. It's even worse than that. Congress has shut the government down because it couldn't fund the government by September 30th, is the end of the fiscal year. They couldn't do that, and they couldn't agree on a continuing resolution. They actually shut the government down 22 times in the last 45 years. This is totally broken. The whole budget process is totally broken. Only 4 times has Congress funded the federal government on time since 1974. And nobody even talked about that until I got up there. I come from a business perspective. I looked at it and said, well, wait a minute. I'm on the budget committee. Don't we have to do this on time? Well, no, we'll just do a CR. Well, that's not good enough. So what we've done is really started working on changing the way we fund the government. And this year, this would be the 3rd year in a row that we've avoided a CR, if in fact we can accomplish that. The problem is this. people don't look at it in terms of days until the day. We have 20 working days between now and 31 July. Why is 31 July important? Because August traditionally is a state work month where Congress goes back in the state and they go around and take care of constituents, and they travel to see military personnel around the world and that kind of thing. Last 2 years, I wrote a letter to the Senate leadership, and they agreed. We had 16 people agree with me last year, and the leadership kept us there in August, and we went from 12% funding on 31 July to 30 August, we were at 75%. That's the first time in 22 years we got that far. Now that's of just the discretionary funding, but the good news about that is that the Defense Department got funded in August. And so we did not have the threat of a CR on the military. We're doing everything we can right now because of the delay getting started. We haven't appropriated a bill yet. So we're way behind this year because of all the nonsense that's happened the first half of this year around border security and the appropriating process and so forth from last year. So I still think that the focus is right now to get past the budget cap and move to an appropriation between Health and Human Services and Defense and get those two agreed upon first, and let's get past that before 31 July so that we make sure that we don't have to have a CR come September 30th.
Yes, Senator. I think a lot of us enjoy when things stay on track.
Well, people die if you don't do things on time here, right? I mean, that's the whole point. And up there, they don't seem to have that sense of urgency. In business, if you don't do it on time, in a farm, you don't do it on time, things happen. Bad things happen. Up there, they just kick the can down the road and pick it up next week or next month or next year, and they don't really understand the impact that it has out here on the economy, on our military, on our allies. We've confused the world in the last 10 years, and now we're clearing that up. We're making sure people know what we want, what we stand for. And America first doesn't mean America alone. And I think the rest of the world, including the allies, and I've met over 26 heads of state now, and I go around talking to military heads. I spent a day with the head of the military in Pakistan. They understand now. They're beginning to understand what's important to us. And that clears things up around the world. It takes a lot of the questions out. It makes your life safer. It makes your troops safer. And frankly, it better defines what our role is around the world. Syria is a perfect example. The rest of the world was quite happy to sit back and see if we were going to take the full load. We said, no, we're not going to do that. And people said, oh, no. And remember, President Trump said we're going to pull out of Syria. What he was trying to do was send a message to our allies. And then what happened? The peaceful area up top, the no-fly zone basically is what it was then manned by 3 of our allies. So they know there's a partnership role here to be played. That's why the Guard's so important. Look at the relationship we have right now just with the Georgia Guard in Republic of Georgia and in Argentina. I mean, I just think that's phenomenal, and those people realize, they appreciate it. I've met the head of Georgia twice now, and they are so appreciative of what our relationship is and how important that is.
Yes, Senator. It's important to support our National Guardsmen both when they deploy and when they return home from the warfight. What is Congress doing to support military families and create a vibrant economy for our returning Guardsmen?
We have a few spouses here, don't we? Would the spouses stand up just a minute? We have a few spouses. Come on. I'm sorry? Oh, they're at a brunch. Well, why not invited to that? I mean, I get to hang with you guys. I could have been over there. All right, well, all right, guys, tell them I at least was going to give them a round of applause, but don't worry. You know, Fort Stewart is a really important base for a lot of reasons. We have a lot of military personnel transitioning back into civilian life. And the other thing is when you go to Moody and Benning and all that, and you meet with families of deployed personnel, it's so important in these communities. We have these civilian community support groups, like the 21st Century Partnership in Warner Robins. We've got others at every base. And that has developed in my lifetime to be a really meaningful capability of helping people individually. And so when I go home and I talk to people who are retired or people still active, that's one of the things they talk about. The second thing is, if you come home after being in the military and now you're coming out of service and the economy is on its butt, I mean, what good is that? So, I mean, we've got the economy growing at twice the rate as we did over the last decade. We've created 5 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment in 50 years, lowest African American, Asian, and Hispanic unemployment in ever measured. And the highest thing I'm proud of is the highest middle class income we've ever had in the United States right now. So if somebody is opting out and they're coming back into civilian life, now they're coming back into a very vibrant economy who need the skills of the people that you're training here every day. Now, we want to keep people in the military. And to do that, I think we have to be a lot more mindful of what we do in the military. The pace of deployment has gotten much, much greater. We've been at war for 18 years now almost. And when you go over there, it's real. And so we burn up our military on our assets. And we have to I think we have to keep a mindful eye on the families, because without the family support of the individual warfighter, you don't have a volunteer service. So it's one of the key success elements that we focus on up there. It's one of the reasons this pay increase, look, this pay increase does not match inflation. It's a catch-up, because for so long we didn't do that, and it's a meager catch-up. We're committed now to try to do this over the next decade to make sure that we attract the right kind of people. I just met a young captain from Haiti. Took him 7 years to get in here and get citizenship. But now he's a captain on the way up, just a sharp, bright guy. You can tell, I only talked to him for 2 or 3 minutes. I'm embarrassing him, I'm sure, but that's the kind of individual we're looking for, not just from Haiti, but right here in our own country. So there are a few of us up there that are focused on what it takes to have a volunteer force of the level that we want.
Yes, Senator. And again, we asked for submitted questions in advance, and this is the last one I had. The President recently nominated 2 individuals for top positions within DOD. Patrick Shanahan to be the Secretary of Defense and Barbara Barrett to be the Secretary of the Air Force. What do you think about those nominations, and when do you think the Senate will confirm them?
Well, the Senate has changed the rules so we can accelerate that. This is part of the obstructionism of the last 2 years. No other time in U.S. history has a minority party used the 30-hour debate rule to absolutely shut down confirmations. President Trump, based on the way we were doing it, would not have gotten all of his nominees confirmed in 8 years. And so we've changed that rule now, and we're moving forward. So to answer the second part of the question, we'll get them very, very shortly. The President knows how important that is. Mitch McConnell knows how important that is. We'll get them confirmed. They'll be confirmed. Both of these people will be confirmed with high numbers. I know Barbara Barrett personally. We've done some things professionally together, and she was trained to be an astronaut. She's got a background as a pilot. When you see her background, she's like Secretary Wilson. I mean, she's just a rock star. And I hate that Secretary Wilson resigned as Secretary of the Air Force. I'm a personal friend of hers. She's going out now to UTEP, University of Texas, El Paso. She'll be the president out there. That's really her first love. So she got the Air Force turned in the direction, helped author ABMS, and did just such a great thing. And Barbara Barrett now will come in and think about this new domain, space, and the organization we just talked about under the Secretary of the Air Force. Wouldn't it be great to have a Secretary of the Air Force that understood a little bit about space? I mean, that's what Barbara Barrett brings. Pat Shanahan comes from a corporate world, and so at a time when we try to become much more fiscally responsible in the military and make sure we have the resources directed at the right needs, I think he's the right guy at the right time. Now, he's a totally different person than General Mattis or Secretary Mattis, just totally different. You can't compare the two. I love General Mattis. He was the right guy at the right time. Now we're moving into this phase, and I think his background in the supply chain will be very, very critical. One of the problems we have in the U.S. military right now is after the last decade, we've withered up our supply chain. That's why I'm so excited to see small businesses starting to thrive in here, because that's what builds into big businesses. If you think about it, we only have 5 shipbuilders left in the United States, and each one of them are almost a sole source supply for the type of ship that they build. And so one of the problems we've got is to rebuild that supply chain, make sure we have a little more continuous relationship with them. And that's why these continuing resolutions are so important to get rid of, because that just totally devastates the supply chain, whether you're talking about ammo or nuclear submarines.
Yes, Senator. Senator Perdue, do you have any concluding remarks you'd like to make?
Sure. I thought I was going until about 2 o'clock. Is that not right? No, I'm new to this political game. I was in the real world for 40 years. I've lived all over the world, lived in Europe, lived in Asia. I've seen our U.S. military in Singapore. I've seen them in Colombia right now. Our U.S. Navy is in Colombia, in the hills of Colombia, waiting for people to come across the border from Venezuela to get medical treatment. I've seen them in Haiti after the earthquake. The USS Mercy was the first ship of any kind that showed up in Port-au-Prince to help earthquake victims. I've seen them in 1962 when I thought the world was coming to the end, and people that I knew, they were older than me, but they were B-52 pilots or C-141s or KC-135 staff flying these planes. I've seen them in Afghanistan. I've seen them in Gaziantep, in Turkey, in Syria. I've seen them in Israel. I can't think of any other thing the United States has done in the last 230 years that's been better and more successful than building the military capability we have. But it's not just about fighting wars. It's about deterring wars. I mean, all these people in the past have said, from Sun Tzu forward, have said the best way to win a war is to avoid it. And the best way to avoid it is make sure the guy on the other side knows you're serious. And I think that's what's going on right now around the world, is that North Korea is at the table for a reason. They know that the alternative would have ramifications that would not be acceptable to them. And so that's what we're about. But you can't do that with a paper tiger. We know we've taken advantage of our military over the last 17 years, burning them out in 2 wars. We haven't recapped them. Now we have the realization, and it's about money, but it's more than it's about people. We have people who left in mid-career. We need to make sure that our young officers and our young non-com officers are seeing this as a career, and they see how dedicated we as a country are. But let me tell you the best thing that's happened in my lifetime. I remember the 70s, guys, when some of my buddies were coming back from Vietnam. When that thing shut down. It wasn't pretty. I saw people get spit at, in airports and that sort of thing. Boy, it's so good now to see a guy in first class get up and give his seat away to a private who's getting on the plane, getting ready to go to his first assignment. It's pretty cool to see the USO in the Atlanta airport do what they do out there every day. I mean, it's pretty good to be in New Delhi, and this is a true story, and I see a captain in civilian uniform, or in civilian clothes, take care of a young private who stumbled in there, in uniform, was having trouble figuring his way through, and I saw that captain take care of him.
Yes, sir.
I am so proud to be in the United States Senate and be on the Armed Services Committee. I just want you guys to know how proud I am of you and all of your team, and I want you to know that we're trying to do better than we've done the last 15, 20 years in terms of having your back. So better is yet to come. God bless you. You make the world a safer place. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Colonel Baker also did something.
Thank you.
Senator, we can't thank you enough on behalf of the 15,000 men and women in the Georgia Army, Air National Guard, and our State Defense Force, and obviously our industry partners and our families. We just want to present you this book. We guess you spend a lot of time on airplanes.
Yes, sir.
This might help if you got any sleep deprivation issues, and hope you enjoy it, and please take this corner.
General,
on behalf
thank you.
of all
God
those
bless
folks.
you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.